Okay, as we're entering October, I thought it would be good to go over some of the fall foliage photos that I got and the reasons I took them. And hopefully, it'll give you guys some ideas on what to do with photos as well. So, we got a bunch of them here. Let's get started. We'll do three at a time. So, this series was just a very simple capture. As you can see, these two line up because they were shot in series across the horizon in front of me, just to get a feel for the color that was available and how it contrasted close to the shore versus how it was higher up the hill. This one over here, I wanted to get a little bit more detail in the color and show off those trees, and you can see the leaves much clearer there, obviously, than you can from the distance here. Now, the next set, that house just stands out so much that I always want to take pictures of it. It's an interesting shape, and it just sets itself off from the background so much. The next one is from a cruise that I was taking along the Lake Champlain. That's what a bunch of these are from. And as you can see, the sun was playing hide and seek, so it was hitting certain areas and not others. And I wanted to capture this to show the difference between how dark the water was, the darkness of the mountain behind it, and how bright it was when the sun hit. This one over here, I wanted to capture just because of all the little colors that you can see everywhere in this picture. There's just such a nice spray of color throughout the picture with the backdrop of almost like a carpet of color behind it. Moving on, there's that carpet of color again, going up to Mount Defiance with its pavilion at the top and the flag flying. Next, you can see the stone in there, and it just made a nice juxtaposition for me to capture that image with the stone as an offset to all the color around it. Another image showing the difference between where the sun was hitting and the rest of the color around it. It almost makes it look like this area here is on fire. Moving down, I like the lines going across here, as well as the wanted to get the detail of the leaves. I used as you can see, a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. This was just at the 100 millimeter level because the ship was so close to the shore at that point. Next one, another nice line of stone running right through the middle of all this color. So I was able to capture the water as well as this stone vein running through all the surrounding color. This is an old house that dates back to the 1800s. And just seeing it surrounded by the trees like that, I just wanted to grab that image to show that just surrounded in a cluster of trees. Here we have another image showing the amount of sun and the way the sun was hitting this mountain as opposed to the other surroundings. The clouds had opened just enough to create this pattern of light across it. And at the end of the cruise, when we headed back to the dock, that's a picture of the pavilion at Fort Ticonderoga, surrounded by the colors of the time. Now we move on to later in the month. What I found is while it's easy to see these rays of light, capturing them, not so much. So you can see I went up to 8,000th of a second. I did it at 2.8 because I just wanted to capture the clouds and I didn't want everything to be absolutely sharp. I was using my 24 to 70 at 70 millimeters. And I went that high to make sure that the area around it was darkened enough that these beams would show up more. Because of the raw nature of the way I shoot, and even if I did it with JPEGs, I'm sure I'd have the same issue, and that is that those lines aren't as sharp. They don't show up as much as the human eye would see them in person. And I wanted to capture that uh, image the way I was seeing it, which meant darkening everything down so that it would show up even better in the photograph. So some of the next ones will also have light in it in some of them, which is why I took them. Now you can see how the foliage had changed. If we go back to that first one, you remember that this was a line that I had taken before, and you can see that the foliage is a little bit more on the muted side. Again, another hill, but you can still see the living color that's just vibrant in the hill itself and in the mountain behind it. Again, over here, wanted to capture both the sun hitting this patch here, as well as you can see the sun coming through the cloud up there. And again, I had to go up to a 5,000th of a second to get it darkened so that I can make sure that I captured that light properly and it didn't just wash out. The yellow, as well as the yellow in the foreground, is what caught my eye for this photograph, and I wanted to make sure that I caught both this blurring in the front and that. Now, part of it is I'm short. So for me, this is life. There's usually something between me and what I'm looking at. I'm only 5.5 feet. So I'm sure other people at 6 feet and above probably wouldn't even see this little row of plant in the front. But this is my height and the way I am, so I don't even have to bend down to go get a shot like this. It's just what comes up for me. This one over here, seeing those little buildings nestled in the color, really caught my eye and was something that I wanted to capture. It's on the far side of the lake from where I was. This is using my 70 to 300 at 300 millimeters. Now, this lens is a 4 to a 5.6, and it's an old EF glass. The other photos that you saw with the 100 to 400, it was a rented lens. I don't do enough landscaping yet to want to get the better glass yet. I only do it at this time of the year. And for $60, I can rent the lens for a couple of weeks, as opposed to paying $600 for that, or the better one that I want to get is about $2,000. Over here is the Fort View restaurant, and you can see the it's muted, but you can still see the vibrant reds and oranges in the hill behind it. And it's one of those things that every time I go up to the fort during the fall and I've got a telephoto with me, I always like to capture an image of that building. It is a distance away. You can see I've got it at 300 millimeters, but it's just something to me I always want to capture. Getting back to the fort itself, on the path to the walled garden is this row of trees on either side. And this would typically be a stone pathway or a dirt pathway going to the garden itself. But I wanted to capture it with the gate in the front. Unfortunately, to my back was an electric fence. So I was limited on how far back I could get with this image, and I didn't want to swap out the other lens. I had the 70 to 300 on me. So I still think it did a good job of capturing those lines going off into the distance. And you can see this gate at the end. And this is what you have at the back of that gate. Um, I liked capturing it with it all blurred so that the focus of your attention is on that statue in the center rather than on the gate in front of it, just using that as like a frame for the photograph itself. But again, this is you can see the line going down to that gate, and here you can see the pathway line going toward the statue itself. Over here, another framing shot. I use the trees to frame the color across the lake at a little isle or peninsula that's across the way from the fort itself. This is shot from the pavilion's view. Again, another carpet of color up on the hill. Again, we're more in the rust colors than we are in the vibrant reds and yellows and things that we saw before. They've been working on a recreation of what the building would have looked like at the time. And this would have been a barracks for soldiers. And not only did I want to capture the color of the trees around it, I wanted to use it as a scale so that you could see just how compact the building is. And to give you a sense of scale, I almost have to duck to walk through the doorway going into that building. And this would be a building that would have a fireplace in it and would house one or more soldiers, depending on how they finish the building off. I know when they had a even smaller setup, there was enough room in there for 4 bunks, not very wide, obviously, with the fireplace. So you could walk in and there was 2 bunks down and 2 bunks above them. Another view just up from this previous one, showing the oranges of the trees around it. Now another shot where I wanted to capture that light coming into the clouds, and the only way I could really see to do it was to stand down the amount of light. So shooting at 70 millimeters, but I jacked it up to a 8,000th of a second. Left the focus at the f at 4 so that I could capture that light. But in order to make sure that I got the light cleanly and show off the textures of the clouds, I had to step it up to 8,000th of a second just to bring that light to the forefront. This one here, both to me a change of the seasons, as well as what an interesting looking plant underneath what would have been covered in leaves. You can actually see the bones of the tree itself. Another image shot from the fort. You can see some of the cannon in the foreground, and yet this carpet of yellows and browns and oranges that appear behind those cannon. 2 more of the light. This one came out a little bit better, I think, showing off the extra shafts in there than this one did. But again, trying to capture that, I'm at 5,000th of a second here and 4,000th of a second here to try to capture that light. My goal was to get the light more than it was to get the colors and things behind it. Now, could you change this with masking? Yes. I could go into Lightroom, which is what I have here, and I could mask those clouds, then invert it so that I've got the land beneath it and crank up the exposure on the land so the land would be brighter. But I really wanted to highlight the light coming down. And if I were to make this be more bright down here, it would detract from the light beams themselves. Another image showing the water as well as these brilliant yellows here, some oranges and browns as well as the green that are there, and some of the trees have already lost their leaves. This last pair, this tree stands out from the surrounding. And this is where I wish I had something better than the f5 that I had. I'm at 140 millimeters. If I had something a little bit lower on the f, like a 3, I might be able to get this background blurred out a little more, because these dead trees behind it, I really don't care about that. I want this to be the focal point of the photograph. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, I could just go into Photoshop and blur it. I'm not a fan of the fake bokeh yet. And next week, I'll go over some of the photographs I caught of people at the fort while they're doing the events and things, and my approach to doing portrait photography. But at the same time, what the fake bokeh doesn't do is it doesn't blur the foreground. And if you look at a real bokeh photograph, which we'll have some to look at next week, it blurs the foreground and the background. So what the F is the focal length of the lens. We're talking about the amount of light that comes in, the aperture of it, over 5. So if it were 100 over 5, it'd be 20 millimeters worth of opening that I can use to bring in the light. The smaller the number under the F, the more limits you can put on what's in focus. So the f2.8, when taking a picture of a person, is going to capture their face, but it could put some of the body out of focus. Depending on where you are in relationship to the person as well, and what you've got it set to, you might be able to get the tip of their nose in focus and blur out the rest of their face if you use that as your focal point. So it allows you to bring in a three-dimensional aspect to the image that your brain could put in by itself when you're looking at it and you're focusing on the person, for example. You're going to separate that person from the background because you have binocular vision. But a camera doesn't have that ability. It's just got the one lens to work from. It's got monocular vision. So in order for us to get a good separation, especially when you're also considering the fact that this is a printed object, it's not an object that has any depth to it. In order to simulate that depth, you have to have that ability to have bokeh, not just in the background, but the background and the foreground, to pull your subject out of the photograph and make it much more visible. In this next one, it was like a waterfall of light flowing down the hill here. 225 millimeters, 1,000th of a second, because I wanted to just capture that light. It almost looks like the light's falling down the hill and highlighting that little strip that's in there. So that's what I got for you this week. I hope you guys get something valuable out of this episode, and I will talk to you guys all next week.